Welcome to the Healer's Choice. We continue our story. The Bell of Truth. Eirina kept a quick pace. The hammering and flashes of orange light from the Steel District left her as she came upon the stone burrows. This district of Aethiniel was once a well-developed area of affordable homes and small businesses, until the western tower of Judican fell. The rubble of Judican's tower demolished the southernmost parts of the district. What wasn't destroyed in its fall was soon consumed in the unnatural fire that followed. The sorcerer's experiment had escaped. A crow of black fire and smoke had flooded the district and killed many citizens before the northern wizard Highfell destroyed it. This event in history coined the stone burrow its luckless nickname, the Burrow of Crows. Soon after, the entire district had fallen to disrepair and poverty, but this is where Eirina called home. There were men and women dressed similarly to her, and some without clothes at all. The smell of piss and vomit permeated the air like a foul perfume that mingled with the ever-sweet aroma of the drug houses, the red plumes from their chimneys shading the entire district in a sickly pink. Eirina didn't slow her feet, not wanting to make a target for anyone. She was forced to slow on a narrow stairway that had been squeezed in a tiny alley. Upon her descent, she ran over the worn stonework and took a left turn, immediately bumping into 3 small figures. They all bounced back after hitting her knees and hips.
Hey, watch it!
Eirina clutched her belongings with a white-knuckled grip, ready to run, but relaxed upon looking at each child's face. The one to her left, a young half-orc boy, Eric. He measured up to her mid-rib and had the pale white eyes that came with the unnaturally blind. The middle child was a lanky human girl, Mary. Blonde and bright-eyed, a smile spread over her tiny lips as she looked up at Eirina's face. She measured up to Eirina's hip and had the sunken features and bloated belly of the malnourished. The third of these 3 children stood to Eirina's right, a half-elven boy that was more bone than boy. Lorthrus. Mary was still beaming, tugging on Eric's hand emphatically.
Mari, you're pulling too much. I can't tell what you're trying to say.
Eirina!
Lorthrus's voice was deep. Too deep for a child. He had the voice of a young man of 20 rather than a 10-year-old before Eirina. Eric looked in Lorthrus's general direction, a worried look filling his features, before his face circled back round so that he could direct his words at Eirina.
Eirina, we were going to get you. Paul is... he is...
Eirina tapped Eric's dark-haired head. Let's get back, quickly now. She gestured the children to go back the way they came. Lorthrus was the first to take off as Mary took a good grip on Eric's hand, leading him back down the alley. Eirina kept watch over the ends of the alley, paying attention for any passers-by as Lorthrus walked up to a crumbling house wall. He squeezed between several boards that had been affixed to an opening, making it nearly impossible for anyone larger than a child to pass through. Eirina then watched as Mary and Eric slithered their way inside. When it came her turn, she pushed the sack of root through with a rough kick of her foot. She then twisted her body in order to fit through the opening, one limb at a time. The pink light from outside barely showed any details within the home, all save for the dark abyssal hole at the base of the floor. Eirina stepped in front of the waiting children, throwing down the sack before throwing herself down the hole as well. Lorthrus and Mary then made their way carefully down into Eirina's waiting arms, and before Eric could make his way down, Eirina hummed loudly in order for him to find where she was. When he dropped, Eirina took him under the shoulders and helped him land on his feet as best she could. Was that okay? Not too rough? Eric just gave her a nod before Mary took up her place, holding his hand once again. Collecting the sack and following the children to the other end of the hole, Eirina ducked down as they made their way into a dugout tunnel leading through the partial sewer system and into the basement proper of the dilapidated house above. Once inside the dim firelight of the basement, there were 3 more boys huddled together, one lying prone on the basement floor. Eric spoke up, catching the others' attention.
Eirina's back.
The 2 boys that were sitting up looked toward Eirina with panic. Eirina rushed past all of the children in order to sit beside the oldest of them all. Paul, a halfling boy that would normally stand at a shorter height than Eric, was sleeping on the basement floor wrapped in several worn blankets. His freckled face is pale and his cheeks flushed as red as his ginger hair, all of which were damp with sweat. Eirina looked at Kylan and Trin, 2 humanoid boys with glittering scales on their darkly tanned skin, their pale gold eyes welling with tears as they focused down on Paul. "Bring the clean water. Hurry." The boys rush away as Eirina tucked the pouch of powder to her waist, pushing the bag of root aside. She touched Paul's head. He was still blistering hot, but his neck and arms were freezing. "Mary, Lorthris, put more wood on the fire. Eric, you'll have to help me carry him." The children all nodded. Mary separated from Eric to help Lorthris with his task, leaving Eirina to lead the young half-orc into carrying Paul. "To the right, and step." Mary and Lorthris had already put more logs to the fire and were waiting with a few ratty coverings to wrap over Paul as Eric and Eirina placed him to the stone floor. Kylan rushed over with a wooden ladle, while his brother carefully hefted a clay jug with a misshapen lip. The sound of sloshing from within said that it was about half full, but Trin was still taking cautious steps, obviously not wanting to spill any of it. Eirina took the jug and pulled out the pouch, dumping its contents into the water. She dipped the ladle in, kneeling down to help Paul sit up and drink. Though unconscious, and having the water drip down his chin multiple times, she did manage to get him to drink the entire jug of water. Once he was breathing easier, Eirina tore a piece of her skirt and held it out to Trin. "Get this stamp and place it on his head, okay?"
Is he going to be okay?
Eirina could see the tears building in Trin's eyes and patted his cheek. "I'll do everything I can to make sure that he will be." Trin let a single tear fall but nodded, rushing toward the corner of the basement. After tending to Paul as much as the group could, Eirina broke down the roots and handed several of them out.
You must have gotten a good payment.
The blind orc gnawed on the root, his tiny tusks digging in with little resistance, while the other children scraped away at the tough exterior.
You were able to get roots and medicine. Not exactly cheap by our standards.
Eirina gulped back a lump in her throat. Eric couldn't tell, and the younger ones likely didn't know better. But Eirina could tell that the old gnome had given her more than her usual amount of root. Eirina's brow lowered, her face twisting in thought at the day's events. "I had 2 whole silver this time, so Neef gave me extra root."
2 whole silver?
Eirina gave a soft grin at Kylan's excitement. "Yes. The baker at the Pearl gave them to me."
Is there anything left?
Eirina nearly choked on her root, but gathered herself before the children could catch her suppressing a cough. "Oh, I'm sorry. The medicine took up the rest of my copper." Eric's brows fell low as he blindly considered the floor, his root held tightly in his hand. Eirina leaned forward from where she sat. "I'm sorry, Eric. Was there something you wanted? I can try and get it tomorrow."
It's fine. Don't worry about it.
He had said it harshly, making his little tusks clack against his teeth, holding a look of shame on his face, obviously not wanting to be a bother. Eirina looked at each child in turn. The littlest of the boys were all seated close together, streaks of dirt on their skin and a pallor to their complexions. Mary, still keeping close to Eric, gnawed on her root with eyes glancing toward the half-orc nervously. There was an unspoken sorrow in the air, and after a moment, Eirina put her root in her pocket, seemingly unable to eat. Lorthrus saw this.
Are you all right, Eirina?
Eirina saw each child looking from Paul to her with worry. She gave them a beaming smile. Don't worry about me. I'm just thinking.
What you thinking about?
Well, she grabbed Kylan by the shoulders and hugged him. I was thinking that once Paul was on his feet, if I can save a few spare coins, we could all go to the coast for a day of swimming. Everyone perked up at this, Mary the most excited of them all. She tugged on Eric's arm.
I heard her. I heard. I'm blind, not deaf.
At that, Mary stuck her tongue out, and everyone laughed.
She's sticking her tongue out at me, isn't she?
You know Mary best. Eric heaved a sigh, and before anyone could let loose another chuckle at his expense, he jumped to his feet, scooping Mary up and spinning her around. Mary flailed around, and Lorthrus jumped to his feet, smiling. He ducked several times to avoid being hit before trying to tackle Eric. Eric laughed, putting Mary to the ground as he blindly grabbed Lorthrus around the waist, nearly holding him upside down. Kylan and Trin jumped to their feet, roaring with laughter as they jumped onto Eric as well. Eric finally tumbled into a heap with all the kids. They tussled about and played, careful not to let Eric roll too close to the fire in their wrestling. Even tiny Mary was charging in and out of the fray, all of them giggling madly when Eric nearly got a hold of them. Eirina held her first genuine smile of the day as she stared at the children. She looked to her right, at Paul, who was now sleeping soundlessly and looking less flushed. Things are going to change, I promise. It was evening. The children had all eaten another serving of root and were sound asleep around the fire. Eirina, on the other hand, was sitting at the tunnel exit, looking at the stonework in the dim light. Clenching her fist, she got to her feet and went back toward the children. She looked over Paul, making sure he was well tucked in, and then one by one checked over the smallest of the kids before stopping at Eric. She pet his ebony hair as he slept. I need you to hold out just a little longer. Getting back to her feet, she shuffled through the dim toward the tunnel and out to the hole. Blindly reaching out, she found the rope tethered to the stonework above. She climbed up to the broken floors of the house and squeezed out the wall into the alley. The sun was not but a tiny flame on the horizon. The sky painted a deep violet above her head as she ventured out of the burrow and through the steel district, before making her way to a small section of the city just outside of the Pearl, Ruby Town. Tall lamps were blazing with life along the uneven cobbles, and strings of red lanterns and gauzy cloths of red and pink were strewn about. Men and women of all types were laughing and stumbling about, high on weed or drunk on fine wine. A tavern to Eirina's left was particularly noisy, and as she passed by, 4 figures burst out its doors, singing bawdy songs. It was Julius and Faltho, with 2 elegant half-elven women. Faltho swung his bottle with drunken exuberance, and it flew free from his hand, smashing at Eirina's feet. Eirina scrambled back so the glass wouldn't strike her, as crimson-colored wine spread between the cracks of the cobble. She pulled her cloak tighter as she sidestepped around the mess, trying to avoid the 2 guards. However, the men caught up to her. Faltho, with less of a chill to his voice, called out to her.
Sorry there, my good sir. Oh,
He separated from his female companions, looking over Eirina closely.
or should I say, lady.
He forced back her hood with a heavy hand, making Eirina jump and grasp at it in an attempt to pull it back down. Eirina nearly ran, but felt a hand on her elbow and she went as stiff as a board as she saw Julius at her other side.
What are you doing here?
Both ladies finally caught up, and Faltho quickly took them under each arm, staring at Eirina, waggling his brows to the other guardsmen.
Thought a girl like you was too much a prude to be in a place like this.
He nudged Julius closer to her.
Oh, looking for work? Julius would be more than willing to pay.
Eirina pulled her elbow free of Julius's hand and took several back steps.
Then perhaps you're looking for fun.
Eirina gave him a look of disgust, just as he gripped one of the elves by the face.
Don't deny yourself the pleasure of being spoiled by such crafty hands.
He kissed the elven woman, and Eirina shook her head emphatically, backing away to run before she could get caught again. She could hear Faltho's laughter following after her.
Offer stands, Miss Eirina. You've got little options left to you.
Keeping her pace brisk, she shivered at Faltho's words, her eyes darting over the road to avoid meeting with worse interactions. Eventually, after walking the street nearly twice over, she stopped in front of a building. It was an inn that sat snugly between two taverns, called the Sleepless Moon. Eirina strode towards the doors, seeing that the lights within were at full spark, though some of the windows above her were pitch. Pressing open the door to her left, she stepped inside and was assaulted with the smell of perfume and smoke. The inn's decor was made of dark woods and even deeper reds. There were even purple silk drapes. She passed hanging silver stars that held lit candles before finding the main floor filled with an array of nude bodies. They were tangled together in a conversation pit, though conversation was not being had. Eirina looked away and was gripped by her shoulder. "May I help you? We're quite full this evening." This woman looked at Eirina before going wide-eyed and hissing out a whisper in shock. "Mama?" Eirina's eyes went wide as well as she looked toward the woman. They were young, seemingly just budding into womanhood. The woman nearly grasped Eirina in a hug, but stopped. She shook with restraint as she looked over Eirina's fearful face. Pulling herself back, her silk nightgown shimmering in the candlelight as her bird-sharp eyes focused on Eirina with concern. "What happened? Are you okay? Why are you here? Can we talk?" Yes, of course. We can go to my room." She gently pulled Eirina out of the main room, the soft sounds of silk and moans cresting and falling as they walked by. She tugged Eirina gently to a short flight of stairs, taking the curve to the second floor. A squat hall was laid out in two directions. There were doors to the right that would overlook the street, and the left were rooms that would face the back alley. Taking the left hall, the woman led Eirina to the fourth door, opening it quickly to rush inside. Eirina let out a heavy breath, one she seemed to have been holding to keep the smell from making her cough as she was brought through the establishment. Her head lifted, and she looked around the room, taking it in. It smelled of rosemary and mint, a calming smell compared to the heady aromas permeating the building. The furniture, well made and soft-looking, had no rough edges to the wood, and well-maintained cushions and blankets were littered in convenient spots for comfort. "I was about to make some tea. Would you like a cup?" Eirina's attention fell on the woman again. In having some distance between them, she could see the stretches of lithe muscle and the healthy glow of the woman's skin. "Yes, thank you. Do I have to call you by a certain name here? The woman looked toward Eirina with a shrug as she dug into a cabinet for a small wooden box. Here I'm called Luna, top girl of the sleepless moon. Eirina's face paled at the off-kilter cheer Luna used to state her rank in the brothel. The woman tucked her raven-colored hair, revealing the slight point to her ears. She turned her smiling face toward Eirina as she prepared the tea leaves. But please don't call me that. Just call me Dia as you did before. Eirina smiled softly as Dia slid further into her kitchenette and began to pull a steaming kettle from over a tiny iron stove. It's been some time since we last saw one another. Last we met, you were singing outside the Pearl at Halecrest. Dia's face fell into sorrow. And before that was the night I left. Eirina shivered at that as she watched Dia turn toward her. I wanted so badly for you to give your blessing. Dia gestured at her own heart, shame creeping into her tone. You warned me, told me what to expect, and I said things that were harsh, and in the end you were right. She gestured around herself. Eirina's eyes then fell to the floor. I wish I hadn't been. I wish you had gotten the life you deserved. I more than deserve this life. Taking several cups from her cabinets, she gave a solemn look to Eirina from over her shoulder. I did this to myself. I did this, and though it was hard and terrifying, I can't say that I regret the outcome. Eirina sat back upright, her face filled with sorrow and confusion. Dia waved a hand. I don't think I'm making any sense at the moment. I'm just so glad that you're here right now. After seeing you at the plaza, I nearly expected to never see you again. Her skin was flushed with happiness, and her glittering blue eyes focused on Eirina with impassioned glee. She then turned, continuing to steep the tea as Eirina spoke. Did you think I wouldn't come? Pouring the tea into cups, Dia gave a tight sigh. When you said nothing to me at the plaza, I thought you were ignoring me. Eirina just shook her head as Dia placed the tea in front of her. I was just in shock. I was just so happy to see you alive. I had so many things running through my mind. I didn't know what to ask or what to say. Before Dia could move away, Eirina put a hand over hers. I wish I could have been better about it, but I never stopped wishing to see your face again. Dia gave a look of understanding and smiled softly. I'm just glad you're here now. It's good to see you. Eirina held a weak smile, trying not to show how much she wanted to cry at those words. Dia curled up into her chair and began to take a sip of her tea. Sorry, you came all this way to talk. Is there anything going on? Can I? Paul is sick. Dia froze and looked at Eirina wide-eyed. Eric's vision is getting worse, and I'm desperate. Do you need medicine? I have some money. No. Neve was kind enough to give me a fever reducer. Dia's face twitched, and she put her thumbnail to her mouth for a moment before giving a thoughtful expression. You shouldn't depend solely on him for treatment. Poultices and potions can only do so much. You need to get them to a healer. She set her cup to the table and went to a long silken coin purse hanging off her wardrobe. The clink and shine of coin clutched in Dia's hand made Eirina tuck back, almost too nervous to look at it. Take some coin. You get a proper meal for everyone, and if you need more than a fever reducer, you go straight to a healer. Dia held out several gold pieces. Eirina's jaw dropped as she looked from the open hand to the young elven woman. That's too much. I wouldn't even know how to repay you. You don't. Dia took Eirina's hands and forced the gold into her palms, clasping her own hands around them. You took such good care of me, and I repaid your kindness by cursing at you and running off. Please, just take it, Mama. The word Mama made Eirina flinch, but she could see the determined look and concern in Dia's eyes. She felt the cold metal slide over her palm as she clenched them into a fist. This time she had to wipe her eyes to stop her tears from falling. "Thank you, Dia." Dia hugged Eirina, the young woman's raven hair tickling her cheeks. When they separated, Dia looked down into Eirina's eyes. "Is there anything else you need? Anything at all?" Eirina felt the warming gold in her hand and shook her head with disbelief. "Yes, oh gods. I was so taken aback by everything, I nearly forgot the real reason I came." She looked up at Dia, her tired eyes filled with nervousness. "I am grateful to you, but my intention wasn't to ask for money." She struggled for a moment, her neck tightening as she swallowed back the lump in her throat. "I need a bath." Dia's face went into a wave of different emotions, all of them stirred with confusion. "You want to bathe?" Eirina stiffened as Dia knelt down in front of her. She looked into Eirina's eyes more intently, seemingly trying to probe what was going through Eirina's head. "And the dress?" Dia was still obviously confused at the request, but got to her feet and went back toward her wardrobe. She began to rifle through a few dresses until she grabbed a pale blue one with lace trim. "This one should fit you." Eirina hung her head for a moment, heaving a sigh of relief. "I'll prepare a bath for you, but I have to ask, what is this about?" Determination gleaming in her eyes as she stared into her teacup. "Changing my luck,"